So, good day, everyone. Welcome to Runtime Reverie, episode 3, newly rebranded and hot off the press. We've got Patrick Smith here, Craig Sullivan, and Armin. We're going to be talking about some various random engineering and software-related subjects that have come to our attention this week. So, Craig's got a couple of topics. Do you want to kick us off, Craig? What's the first one?
Oh, look, I'm going to go with actually topic of developer happiness and what makes people happy in their work. It's one of those things that comes up in basically every place I've ever worked at. People who are happy in their job produce great things, and that affects the whole business of great products. But I don't think people actually understand the essence of what makes people happy in their work, and especially with someone like Patrick. I reckon at the moment he's probably the happiest I've seen him at the moment, working on his WebAssembly and those sort of things, yet not in a corporate job as such. So I was sort of keen to find out from Patrick exactly, what's making him happy working on that, and how that sort of has changed from other bigger corporate stuff he's done in the past. And yeah, sure.
It's an interesting reflection, and just to point out, we've all been doing this for somewhere between 10 and 20 odd years. So we've probably seen a good spectrum of different work environments in different places. And you've seen the big business, you've seen the small business, you've seen your own hustle. And I wonder, do you think there's a correlation there, Pat? Is it inversely correlated? The bigger the business, the less happy?
Well, I don't think my experience can necessarily generalize, but who knows? I started getting into writing HTML early 2000s, would literally be 2002 or maybe even early, GeoCities and stuff. First started playing around with that stuff. So I was always curious about the web and and then I studied multimedia design. So that was because I actually thought at the time, I could study computer science, but I'm not sure if that's quite what I want. So I'd go in the sort of slightly more designer angle. And then out of uni, I needed to make money. So I did freelance web development, and I didn't make much money at all doing that. But and then I did a startup, and then so spent 3 years pouring my soul into that, and it was the most enjoyable work I've probably ever had, which I'm reliving now, doing startup stuff as well. So the commercial stuff was, to me, always a compromise, and whenever I'm in an organization doing it for money, it's I have to try and find that thing that's close to the startup stuff for me. So yeah, for me, the most depressing thing is getting given a ticket with no context, it's all written out. I don't have to ask any questions or put myself in the user's shoes or anything like that. That to me is a lifeless sort of work. So, but other developers I know are really happy. They just want to be given a cool problem to solve, and so I understand that, but for me that's gets boring after a week. So yeah.
See, one of the things I found was that people who resign from companies tend to not do it because of the money, or, if they're unhappy in this place, they'll always give you the nice answer on their way out, it's for the new opportunities and everything else. But often it's because they were just unhappy or unappreciated.
Yeah, they'll do it's not you, it's me. Yeah. But
there's the nice answers, and then there's the answers you get offline, which are more accurate. Very, very radically different than what you get in the public Slack channel. But yeah, I've always thought of that as that philosopher with those 3 ingredients of happiness is something to work on, someone you love, and something to hope for. And if those 3 ingredients aren't there, and when you apply it to work and you go, am I working on something with impact that people actually enjoy and appreciate, or is it just something that just has to be done? And do you love working with the teammates around you? Do you have adversity? Are you striving for big things? And then that leads into that hope. What are you hoping to achieve? What's at the end of the tunnel? What are the big goals? If the goals aren't big enough, people leave as well. yeah, and it's fun to watch how that affects different people, right? Positively, and then trying to get cultural change in an unhappy spot in order to maintain retention. It's very hard to do.
Your 3 points, I think, sound very much like what Daniel Pink raised in Drive. I don't know if you read that book 10 more years ago. Have you read Daniel Pink's book?
No.
I've read one
Drive.
of his books.
Sorry, go ahead.
I've read one of his books, but I don't think it was Drive.
Yeah, there's a book he wrote called Drive. I was just looking it up to see what year it was published, but I'm guessing about 10 years old. But he talks about those 3 things again, and very similar to what you said. I think from memory, he calls it to live, to love, and to leave a legacy. Those are the 3 things that drive people to do anything. And I think, it's absolutely about that. Like, you have to feel like it's not about whether the business is big or small. It's not about whether it's a startup or an enterprise. It's about whether, are you able to practice your craft and do a good job at something? Are you able to learn and find some meaning in what you're doing? And are other people finding utility from it, which is the legacy part? But yeah, I don't think it's big or small. I found personally really great work experiences in very, very large businesses, and I found bad experiences in small, and vice versa. It really
I've watched two people land at a large company in 2 different areas and can have 2 radically different experiences. Some will say that was a terrible company to work at, and others will say that's the best job I've ever had. So trying to find out what the differences between those places, when basically a lot of the bureaucratic structures are the same, and the things you have to go through are the same experiences. You go, and what was different? And there was small things, like the people around them, they gelled together. In other teams, they were working solo. As a developer, working on your own in the corner kind of sucks. You're not going to get the growth that you're going to get from someone else contesting your ideas and saying, yeah, mate, I don't think you know what you're on about there, and showing you their way, and and learning. So growth, so it gives you that something to do really well. I think that's sort of important for me. I don't know if it's the same with you 2 guys, but working with great people is, for me, number 1.
Absolutely number 1. The most important thing is great people.
Yeah.
Who you're working with, who you're learning from, who you're sitting next to.
What you're doing sort of comes second, right? Yeah. Which comes into that mission of what you're doing, and how you learn, how you develop, how you thrive, how you make mistakes. And that hope is like, what do you want at the end of it? What's it going to look like in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? How do I fit into with that sort of picture? I think they're those 3 pillars. Sort of seems to work out right.
This is where the business's culture really makes a big difference, because even if you have great people, if there's a culture of being antagonistic to each other, or not being collaborative, or like just there's a lot of negative things I've seen in businesses that can, even with the greatest people, can still hamper them working well together, whether it's between teams or even in your team. So it's not just about do you have free lunches, or like coffee in the morning, or whatever. It's the way you work, the way you communicate, the way the business likes to make decisions, the way that it communicates to everyone and between people, combined with who's there.
Yeah. I've always said you can take great people and put them in a bad environment. Like you'll have the wrong impression of them. You'll think that they're bad people as well. We've all worked in places like that, and you meet them outside of that place and you go, yeah, you're all right.
But for me, a big part of why I think like Melbourne's been an interesting case study. I'm not going to say like I've been there and seen it all. Like I've just seen a small sliver, but it feels like Melbourne had like a renaissance like 10, 15 years ago with like a lot of startups, and those startups got really big and successful, and that culture changed. And maybe some of the magic got a bit lost there in those cultures. But for me, like when I go to work at some of the places, I actually just prefer if the management upstairs would just sort of say like, hey, basically like either we just need to get profitable or we're chasing growth, and just like be honest about that. But when you're in a place and they like pretend it's all this like other stuff and feel good sort of stuff and blah blah blah, like a lot of, I'm not saying like that, a lot of places do care about the customer, but there's extra, it can get sort of, if the people upstairs are having these executive meetings and talking about profitability, and that sort of comes down in a different shape differently, it just gets distorted, and that's where things like teams start to fight, because it feels like you're going in one direction and they're going in another, and they're like trying to like squeeze this team to make it a different shape. And it'd just be better if it was just like, hey, we want to make money, or hey, we need to be profitable, and it's like that simple.
Well, culture changes as companies grow, right? Culture for a startup, and then as it goes through a growth stage, and then as a more established one, it will go from really bold and ambitious stuff where you'll just take huge risks because you just have to, right? And then you start having something towards, and then when it gets more evolved, it becomes more defensive in its nature, and small increments, doing, a small improvement over a large, customer base actually equals big results for them. So they don't want to risk that. I get all of that sort of stuff, but you can always interpret things differently too. You could have one person going, we need to focus on profitability. I reckon the place I was, one of the places I was happiest at, actually just rephrased that totally differently. It was more a startup sort of size. And it was like, money is not money. It was customers voting that you've done a good job, right? And so we would actually use that as our trailing metric of whether the features that we shipped, people loved it, because there was a tight correlation between doing that and signups and stuff. And that was really good to watch, because the happiness wasn't the money. The happiness was the customers saying thank you, and signing up for it. To me, just that's just 1 week, yeah.
And that's just good. That's just good business. Like, that's just a good business strategy to be customer first. It's just like, that's going to get you often lead to success. So yeah.
I'm curious, how do you two, like, on the subject of this culture and what the business is trying to do to keep people happy, what's happening in many businesses currently is there's a lot of political activism that's sort of seeping into the mindset. How do you feel about businesses taking positions on things like that publicly? And we've seen this over the last year with many, we don't go into details, but like every sort of political issue or social issue, often some businesses take a position. Others try and remain totally agnostic. They're just about the thing they're trying to do. They're not trying to take a political position. But sometimes a lot of that bleeds in, and it, what's the cause of that? How do you feel about it? Like, what do you think?
I think I'm lucky, like, because I've worked, with people overseas, right? And their nations are different to ours, right? And the cultures are different as well. Like, you can't say that there's a developer while you're at 9 to 5, you're just based on code. You have no impact from the rest of society. It exists. And, especially when it affects the people you work with, and it will sometimes affect them far greater than it will affect you. So you can't just say, nah, it's not important, because to them it is. But I also don't think that companies should be trying to take a stand on it, right? You take a stand on it, you also are basically siding with one side over another. And, people having thoughts, you're allowed to have dumb thoughts. You're allowed to have dumb opinions compared to other people, right? The way we've argued, just from me being an older guy now, right? And you live longer. It's one of those things that's changed in society dramatically, where those arguments are not balanced. Like, you can't just argue and say, I don't agree with anything you say, but we're all good anyway. You're allowed to think differently.
Yeah.
We go to extremes these days, and that, I think, doesn't work well anywhere where you put it.
Yes, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to convey enough nuance. I think for me, like, we live in this bubble of our lifetimes, and we think we know what today is, and we think we know what the past was like, and so we see this difference to how things used to be. I think we get thrown off by that. So I think there's like this sort of meme of like, business used to be neutral. Business didn't used to have any opinions. Like, I just don't think that's true. I think if you study like the 20th century, it's always been political, and like what is political is subjective. So and things get.
So it was always there. There's always.
I think it's always there, and diversity is good. I don't mean diversity as in the. I mean whatever. Like I don't have a problem with that, but like there's this. Like if you believe in free expression, then companies maybe, a company having a particular position on something is fine, because like someone's passionate about whichever way. Like I'm not really a big believer in boiling things down to left and right, because it just sort of takes all the nuance out of it. But if you sort of believe, like say, oh, this person's particular, they're more right wing, and then they create a company, and then the company expresses their views, like. Yeah, that's what happens. And if it's left wing person does the same, that's just what happens. Like, what are they supposed to do? Like, if that's what's powering them, if that's what's motivating them, then that's just what will happen. So I'm a strong believer in like conversation, need to listen to people more, the sort of conformity, which going from whichever direction, it's not really. People have this, I know what's right, I need to make this thing conform to what I believe, and usually that stuff just like backfires, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, interesting.
See, I'm old enough to know that, when the internet came about, trying to come home and tell people this is cool from the internet, it's going to be really cool, right? So previously, if you were a big personality, big opinions, and you're telling everyone, guess what? You're probably going to tell 3 people, right? Now you can just go onto your socials and put it out there, and everyone can hear everyone's opinion. So, the noise quotient is just so much greater. So even though we've always had it,
the consequences, right? Like what was that beer brand in the US that just got destroyed overnight because of a position they took? I don't remember the details, but I don't drink American beer, but they take a position and overnight their business is wrecked, right? There's so much amplification of anything you do in the public light that some of those steps can be disastrous. And
yeah, I think that I think they did that. There's been brands in the US that are using like pride, adding pride. Colors and stuff, and I think Target got targeted. It got a backlash over that. And again, it's just like in our current culture, it feels like we have to decide who's right, who's wrong. Oh, I'm on this side. I'm on the side of Target. Oh, I'm on the opposite side. They did the wrong thing. And for me, that's just it's obviously tribal. Like there's a lot of discussion about that, but it just takes it for me. It's just I would just sit back and go, oh, that's interesting. That's what happened, and I can sort of understand both sides, and I sort of feel a bit. I can be both cynical. I can be both a bit skeptical about these brands trying to use that stuff for marketing advantage, but I can also be a bit sad that people have such a strong feeling about it that they get really angry. And I don't like it's for me, it's just something that happened, and like you need to you can learn from it. It's not like I suddenly have to side with a particular viewpoint and go this is right, that was wrong. Yeah,
we're lucky though, right? We don't have to on our day job with the people we work with, don't have to take sides. We've got this nice little thing my day-to-day job at the moment, you go, man, we just need to talk React Native and TypeScript and cool stuff and, transitions from one screen to another. And it's a great leveler. It doesn't matter what your background is, what your beliefs are, or anything else. Tech rules. To me, that's actually one of the joys of going to work. Isn't the things that are different, it's the things that are the same that you all love, right? So it doesn't.
Things that bring us together, whether you use Vim or Emacs, right? That's what brings us together. Spaces or tabs.
Look, not Vim and Emacs people. We're going to have those dividers.
This is what humans do. They just debate and You know, conflicts on anything. You can put two people that are identical in a room, and eventually they'll find something to disagree on. And
it all starts with, do you have semicolons in JavaScript? To be honest,
that's a great one. You know, I always was a big fan until one day you just hacked my my config file, and then all the semicolons disappeared, and I didn't notice for a while until I stopped missing them so much.
Yeah. We're going to start a flame war, you know that.
Yeah.
But there is only one right answer.
Hey, let's move on to this testing thing. I'm really curious. You want to talk about testing practices? Is that right?
Yeah, it was an interesting discussion I was having with some other engineering managers, and they were explaining that their tests are flaky, right? And thus the cause was badly written tests, whereas I was sort of pushing forward that, no, you actually got to keep digging deeper, right? That if you want long-term fixes, that the bad test is actually the trailing indicator of your process and you do in the system, right? So if your system is unstable and your tests are not passing, but whereas 1 in 10 will pass, and they go, oh, well, I've got the quick green on CI, I'm going to hit go, right? And then push it forward, then you've probably got the whole concept of what development is a little bit askew, and it's not quite right. And so the conversation went from the flaky test to what made the flaky test. And you go, well, what made the flaky test was the flaky code, all right? And actually, it wasn't actually the code or the test. It was actually the fact that it was actually always putting out errors. If you ran it from the console, you see all these warnings, right, that were there. Whereas, like in, I believe it was just Jest, and it was just Jest and was executing after the test was run. So you get the big warning message and go, hey, your code's still running, but the test is finished. So the test actually never passed, but the person never ran the test. All right. So if they ran the test, they would have seen that error and they would have fixed it up. It wasn't because that they were just negligent or bad programmers or anything. They had pressures of time on them, and they're just trying to ship as fast as they can. They did it. They saw the green tick at the bottom of the screen and then shipped it, right? And shipped faster. And all
so
the way.
What would you change? What do you think the problem was there?
I thought the problem was actually initially not pairing, right? That a deadline was being given, right? And people felt this need to comply with this deadline, and they've given it to one poor developer who's sitting in the corner, who's working so hard, and he's trying to cut every corner he can to meet this deadline, which is generally mostly they're artificial things. It should be, you don't ship non-quality goods, right? You ship great stuff. You ship half baked goods, then people aren't going to come back, and enjoy it.
Just for everyone's benefit, pairing's going to be when two people work together on a piece of code so that they can actually bring the cycle time down really, really low and get feedback immediately, and get that quality baked in right from the start.
People seem to think that the quality is added by the test, all right, or by the PR review, right? Whereas both of those are just saying, hey, I'm going to try and tack quality on the end. Like, I've written really bad software in the past, and I've had it pass my really bad tests, right? The whole thing was just jank. It doesn't mean any of it was right. I've worked with people in the past, though, where we've had different working styles, right? Whereas mine is a kick the doors down and get it done and ship it and get it going, right? And just keep pushing forward, right? Always relentlessly pushing forward. And I've worked with people who are the opposite, right? Who like to go slow, who like to think it through. And we've actually, when you pair with those completely different people, you get a contest of ideas, right? So that quality is happening as you're building. They're seeing that and they're going, yeah, that's good, but is it really what you wanted to build? And you sit there and you go, I hate you because you're right.
Yep.
I hate everything about it. And we're going, but you're wrong as well, right? And then you start debating, you start working it. So that's right before you've even shipped it, You're not putting it into a PR, you're not putting it into a branch, you're going back and you're iterating again, and then you're getting it right. And then you're asking those questions, can I make it any better? And then the quality is great. And then you ship it to a PR review, and your tests are going to go well. And then you're going to not have that flakiness. And you know what? You might blow out that deadline that you've given yourself, but you're not going to spend all that time later trying to fix these things, right? So you're actually going to go faster in the longevity of the business, but not just for that particular feature.
Yeah.
I've seen in places, and going to be careful not to generalize, or there'll be definitely in holes in what I say, but I've seen in places where they they'll work on this project, they'll do a sprint or whatever, and then they're like, oh yeah, the technical leadership said we need to add tests, and then they add them at the end. And to me, that's just like a waste of time, because it's like, what is the purpose of that test? Because usually that person's like manually tested the thing anyway, they know it works. That's the thing that validates whether the thing is, done or not. Adding these like tests at the end is like, is that helping me in the future, or is that helping me now? Because if it's helping me in the future, often what I see is then people go, oh, you just added this feature or changed this thing and it broke the test. And then people are like, ugh, like the test broke. And then they go in and then they fix it, make it go green. And again, I think, what is the purpose of this thing? Did it save us? Like, did it communicate anything? Like, to me, good tests are like documentation. You're testing an interface, and then the test is literally saying, I expect to be able to interact with the system in this manner, and this is the behavior I expect from it. And
it's actually getting worse, Patrick, right? Because I've actually got tests. Now we've got GitHub Copilot on there, right? And it's reading all your other tests, right? And then using that to define what the new tests are, and it's auto-generating all the basic ones. But if you feed it garbage, it produces garbage as well, right?
Like in a well-managed project, I ought to be able to, like, I understand it's not always possible, but I ought to be able to go to like into the project, and if they've got some good suite of tests, I should be able to go into that and read those tests, and start to understand how the system works. And if I go into the test and it's just like testing like arbitrary crap that doesn't really, it's just noise. It's just I don't know. I just find that sort of stuff I've worked in places where they've got tests and like, oh, you have to have this like high amount of tests and coverage and blah blah blah, but then they do like these manual testing days, like, oh, we're going to ship this feature, everyone get on board, the whole team's going to spend a whole day like manually testing this thing. And it's like, well, what the hell is the point of these automated tests? Like, they're just a waste of time. Like, you're doing this extra effort for nothing. Like, good testing for me is actually a form of developer laziness, where I'm automating the manual testing. I don't want to, like, every time I change a feature, have to manually test, go log in, create an account, blah, blah, blah. I want to be lazy, I want to use code and automate that thing. And then I don't have to, now that process that took 20 minutes takes like, 20 seconds.
Yeah, I remember, I agree with both of what you said. I used to work at a bank many years ago, and there was once tester that was legendary, and there was a story that we would tell about this person, right? That, this person was such a good tester that they came into the role, they used to do manual testing back then. This is more than 10 years ago. Instead of doing all the manual testing, they wrote some code. Wow. And they automated it. And then they eventually got it to a point where they'd come into work, sit there and read a book and do other things, because they didn't actually need to do the manual work. They had to sit there, drink coffee, read a book, and get paid because they'd already written the automation. In a way, that's exactly what that is. I'd phrase it a little bit differently. I think for me, I'll paraphrase it, but to me, it's about reducing the cycle time between creating code and knowing whether it worked or not, right? So pairing is exactly that. I've written some code, this person right next to me is analyzing what I'm doing, and they're giving me feedback really, really quick about whether this is good or bad. Writing a test right then and there and checking it, again, telling me whether this is passing or failing. Writing a test, hopefully maybe with the intention of in the future checking it, because this is important, and giving me feedback again. But it's always about making it as short as possible, so that when you make some change, any change, whether that was good or bad.
Yeah, it gives you confidence, right?
That's right.
I have empathy for young developers who are coming in, right? Because, we'll create a card, give them a card, chuck them in the corner, say, go and ship this. And then we'll go, hey, you test this Flakey in CI every now and then, you go and fix it. You go, but we actually haven't, Patrick's got his way of doing things, I've got mine. The way we would converse is by pairing, right? We would share that knowledge transfer. I remember watching a video from Sandy Metz on testing in Ruby, right? And for me, that was life-changing to watch the way she did her testing, where it's basically testing the outputs. And if you're getting the same output, then do you need all that code? If you deleted that code and you got the same output, what purpose is it? That refactoring process was just brilliant. How do I show someone that code, right? Just point that video. It's those ancillary human things of how you're doing that day-to-day coding. You go, oh, have you ever seen that video? You take a break, you send them a link, they have a quick look at it and they go, I'm going to watch that over lunch, and just that process of growth is just enormous, right? The output from your day-to-day work to me isn't a great feature or a great test. It's a better team, right? So if each day it's a little bit better, then what you can accomplish together as a whole group is going to be almost so much better than what you do individually or a set of individuals. And that's how you end up with messy code bases as well. Yeah. It's a bit unmaintainable if you're all doing your own things.
Love it, guys. Shall we call it? It's getting time. This has been awesome. Let's do this again next week.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.